Ela Dvorim, getting the Sefer Dvorim, which is known as Mishnah Torah. Ela Dvorim Shedibe Moshe El Kol Yisrael Be'ever HaYarden. These are the things that Moshe had spoken to all Yisrael, to all the Jews, Be'ever Yarden, on the other side of the Jordan. This is the Transjordan side. Bamidbar, in the desert. Barova, in the plains. Mol Suf, opposite. Seemingly, Suf is always Yam Suf, the Red Sea. Bein Purim, Bein Tofel, Lovad, Chatzir, Dizov. So over here, Rashi explains that Lefishem Divri Tochochos, since all these various statements, the introduction to Sefer Dvorim, before we begin the Mishnah Torah, which is a review of all the mitzvahs, he gives words of rebuke. He enumerates, he delineates all the locations which the Klal Yisrael enraged God. Therefore, he mentions them in a concealed way. The Skiram Beremes, therefore, he only mentions them in an illusionary way, and they quote in Shal Yisrael, out of respect for the Jewish people. So, I'd mentioned in the past, what does it mean they quote Shal Yisrael? Out of respect for the Jewish people. Either would mean that someone else who reads this narrative, it wouldn't be obvious to the public all the times we failed. All the times we failed. Either that's Kvod Shel Yisrael, or Kvod Shel Yisrael means when you give Mussar to a person, for instance, it says, when you give a person Mussar, it says, Lo sisel of chet, you should not do it in the way where you embarrass the person. You cause them embarrassment. Meaning you have to be sensitive to give the person, it shouldn't be head on, but it should be a way that he appreciates what you say, but it's not to be to the point of embarrassment. So the reason, even when he speaks to them in an illusory way, because it's Kvod Shel Yisrael, because to be too direct, it's too much for us to deal with. We're being confronted in a manner that will cause us embarrassment. It's like very often the person says something to someone, they both know what they're speaking about, although it's not explicit. But just by mentioning certain pointers or certain landmarks, that already brings to mind exactly what happened in the past. So Moshe Rabbeinu, he gives Mussar to Klal Yisrael. He's giving it in an illusory way, as we'll see in a moment. Now, over here, there's a Balaturim, very, very beautiful Balaturim, fundamental Balaturim, that he writes. We find that there were 48 brisos between Sinai, Ol Moed, and Arvus Moav, that were made with Klal Yisrael. 48 covenants. He mentions, we find Avodah Zorah mentioned in the Torah 48 times. 48 times. The mitzvahs which relate to the laws pertaining to a ger, to a convert, who converts to become a Jew, to become part of Klal Yisrael, that means he abandoned idolatry to become part of Klal Yisrael, it's mentioned 48 times in the Torah. So we have 48 covenants, 48 times Avodah Zorah is mentioned, and 48 times the laws which pertain to a ger, to a convert, 48 times. Because he left idolatry to attach himself to Torah. So we all do 48s. So it's very interesting. Why is the number the same? 48 times, 48 brisos, covenants, 48 times Avodah Zorah. Now, Chazal tell us many times, a few times in Shas, Barosi Eitzah Barosi Torah Tavlin. We have the Mesillas Yesharim explains that the only antidote for Torah, HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the Eitzah Hara. He created it. And the only one who knows its makeup and the way to deal with it and to subdue it and incapacitate it is only God himself, because he made it. And he says, Barosi Eitzah Barosi Torah Tavlin. I created the Yetzer Hara, and I created the Torah as its antidote. So therefore, how do we know it's exactly tailor-made Torah to deal with every level and every approach of the Yetzer Hara? 48, because there's a corresponding factor, there's a paralleling, 48 brisos, 48 times Avodah Zarah is mentioned in Torah, to tell you that there's no aspect of the Eitzorah which is not addressed by the Torah itself. But again, how do you address all those various levels of Avodah Zarah? Memches Torah Shetorah Nixbem. We have Pirkei Avos, the last 6th chapter. It says the 48 ways you acquire Torah, and tells you exactly all the 48 ways. Where do 48 come from? Because there are 48 brisos, the 48 covenants through which the Torah was given to us, and the Torah tells us there are 48 times Avodah Zarah is mentioned. That means if you actually develop and you address all those 48 levels of HaTorah Nixbem, then you're pretty much secure in regard to be able to have the wherewithal to deal with the Eitzorah of all his machinations.